Hi, it's Sally-Shakti, your Star Priestess and Visionary Writing Guide, and welcome to Writing and Thriving for Visionary Writers. And today I am excited and intrigued to be joined by Jennifer Jones, writing coach. And I would love to hear more about you, Jennifer, because I know that we have a lot in common, we have a lot to talk about, and our viewers are going to be really interested and excited to hear about what you do.
Thank you, Sally. Yes, as you said, I am a writing coach. I trained to teach writing during my PhD in California. Um, had I taken the advice I was giving my students way back in 2001, my PhD would have taken me, could have shaved probably a good 2 to 3 years off of it, but I didn't take my advice because I was a serious academic and my writing was supposed to be hard and I was an expert at making it so. When I changed from academia and moved into coaching, I couldn't, in good faith, tell my clients that their writing could be easy if my writing was killing me. So I started taking my advice and it works. So since 2016, I've been writing the easy way and life is a lot better.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's a long time to spend writing the hard way. So, what did you learn from that, and how have you shifted your writing style since?
I learned that the first draft is never going to be and shouldn't be perfect. And that's what I did throughout my PhD and my academic career after, because I finished my PhD in 2008. So I had a good 8 years after that of doing it the hard way, but most academics do. I now coach academics and they still will try to do it the hard way because it's supposed to be perfect the first time because they have such high standards for themselves. But your first draft's only job is to be done. And that usually means it's going to be a mess. And once I accepted that, I could all of a sudden you can get it out. And then editing it isn't that hard. But trying to hold like a whole book in your head and make it perfect before you can put even one word on a page, that's nearly impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a very similar journey with that because similarly, that's how I wrote my PhD the hard way. I was invited to start coaching other PhD writers just around the final year of my PhD, and that's when I realized that I had to learn how to actually write a thesis because most of my PhD time was spent sitting at the laptop, not writing anything. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that. I blocked out days and weeks for writing, and most of the time I would sit there and not write.
Mhm.
Actually, it reminds me of my undergraduate days when I took a box of Jaffa cakes into the library with me. You could do that back then, and I sat there and ate all the Jaffa cakes and wrote nothing. So I think people in academia and education certainly can resonate with this, but I think a lot of writers, because we are educated to write how we are educated to write, a lot
Yeah.
of people, even when they move into different spheres of writing, carry that same education with us. So what did you do to get over that hurdle? How do you now, for yourself and for the people you coach, how do you teach people to get the first draft done?
Part of it is giving yourself permission to let go of what you learned at school, because a lot of our writing problems come from being taught to write for exams. In an exam, your first draft is your last draft, so it has to be as good as it can be. We're not at school anymore. I hope never to sit another exam. But so part of it is that. The other part is learning to trust the process. And whenever our brains start telling us it's not good enough, you can't type that or you can't write that, that's just our brains trying to keep us safe. So I get out a really big piece of paper. Um, I recently moved house. I'm sad that we had to use all of the packing paper because that's a really good size, but now it's all wrinkled. Um, and crayons, because that doesn't look like anything I've ever handed in. So you take it back to what you did before you were old enough to expect judgment. And that helps you break out of that and accept that you can just play with the ideas. Nobody's going to see it. It is safe.
I think that's really, really great strategy, great advice. And you said there, words you used was expect judgment. And that's something I've been talking with people about a lot, is that we are conditioned to expect to be judged for our writing from the moment we begin to start writing. Especially, I mean, if we're taught in school, if you're lucky to be taught at home before you start school, then there's slightly different expectations. But from the moment we begin school, which is, you know, earlier and earlier age, people are taught to expect to be judged by for their writing, and that uniquely spans across the whole curriculum. Even, you know, what, regardless of what subject you might be doing, it could be physical education, it could be dance, could be drama, could be woodwork. You're still at some component of that that practice is still going to be judged by your writing. And so that's the conditioning that is pretty much unconscious, I think, because it just goes hand in hand with how we're educated to write from the beginning. So stripping that away, what then, what does that look like for you, and what does that look like for some of your clients? How's that transformation kind of taken shape and manifested?
It's on the days whenever we can let go of the fear, it's brilliant. You can all of a sudden write as quick as you can speak. And the words just come out, and you sit down for an hour and you get up and you realize I've produced 2,000 words, and they're not all terrible. But it is constant reminders. And I think we can only do it with constant reminders, because in addition to all of the conditioning we had at school, so many of us live our lives on social media where we're writing and it's being judged, and you get the inevitable grammar police. And I hate it whenever people worry that I'm judging their writing. I only edit whenever you ask me to, so with consent and with payment. I'm not going to go edit your social media posts. But so many people take it upon themselves to do that then we start worrying, even in sort of casual exchanges. And I thought about that a lot whenever I first started coaching, because my PhD was on George Eliot, a pen name for Marianne Evans. She wrote Middlemarch and other novels. She couldn't read her own reviews. If they were bad, they confirmed her worst fears and she wouldn't write anymore. If they were good, she would assume she could never reach that height again and she wouldn't write anymore. And so her common law husband just kept all of the reviews away from her. We don't have that luxury with the internet. So it does take constant conscious effort to remind yourself that whenever you're drafting, it doesn't matter what you write. And you can have those sort of free days where you write lots and lots of stuff, but that does take getting into the right mindset. And usually having a Post-it note taped to your computer screen.
So how do you encourage writers to get into the mindset to enable them to have that kind of freedom with their writing?
It depends on how they work best. Some of them I know work best through speaking instead of writing. So we use dictation software. And then it's just a matter of answering questions. The outlining technique I teach uses questions instead of topics in the outline. So you write your statement of argument, which is the main point you're going to make, and then you list all of the questions you're going to have to answer to prove that statement to your reader. And then whenever you're writing each chapter or section, you're just answering the next question, which makes writing more like having a conversation. Because I haven't met anybody yet who can't talk about their expert topic, but they all say, no, I can't write a book. You just talked to me for an hour and a half about it's really, you can't.
Fantastic. Yeah. Imagine how many words there are in that hour and a half if you transcribe them. One of the problems I've had with transcription, and you know, the software is getting better all the time, and we have to accredit that to AI. Maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation about AI later in our talk. But I think, you know, we have to accredit to AI that transcription software is becoming better. It's certainly better now than it was, say, 1 or 2 years ago, but it's still not perfect. It requires a lot of careful proofreading and editing. And that's one of the biggest problems I find with transcription is generating a lot of material. You can generate a lot of material very quickly, but it might require quite considerable editing, not only proofreading to actually make sure the words are the correct words, and the punctuation is and grammar are correct, but also then to how do you work with turning that spoken language into appropriate written language for a book?
That is similar to turning a written first draft into stuff for a book. The first draft of anything is for the writer. Every draft after that is for the reader. So you have to look at whatever the transcription software produces or whatever you wrote in your first draft and think about, what does my reader need from this? What order, what subheadings, and so on. So there's inevitably going to be a lot of moving around and polishing sentences. For dealing with stuff produced by transcription software, it is getting a lot better. I used it for writing chunks of my third book, and so I was comparing, like, because both Word and Google Docs have speech to text options, and I was comparing those to what YouTube will produce. YouTube is more accurate than Word and Google, or at least it was 2 years ago. And you can upload a video on YouTube as a private video, wait an hour or two, and it'll spit out it calls it subtitles, but you can just copy those and paste them somewhere else. YouTube tends to be more accurate. I wish I could remember what word both Google and Microsoft Word misheard, but it kept hearing broccoli. And I was not writing about broccoli. I was writing about writing. YouTube didn't have those mishearings. Otter.ai is much better than YouTube, but that you're going to end up having to pay for, because if you're writing a book, you're going to go over their monthly limits.
That's great advice. I never considered that about the YouTube transcriptions. I've worked with Word. I often can't get Google Docs to work on transcription, but I work with Word. I also encourage people a lot to use their phones and to dictate onto the Notes app, which has been revolutionary for the people I've been working with. Word has definitely got better. I just love some of the funny stories sometimes. I mean, they're not useful, but they're funny, because one of the first transcriptions I was doing was with somebody who was an embodiment teacher and a yoga practitioner, Ayurvedic practitioner. So she was talking about the different Ayurvedic types, and talking about Vata people, Pitta people, and Kapha people. And what we ended up with in the transcription was vodka people and pizza people, which is not what we meant, but very funny. Totally opposite. So yeah, it's a great tip about the YouTube video to upload yourself speaking and then, download the transcription. We could go in two directions from here, because we can follow that kind of thread with AI, and we can also talk about your books. So I'm going to say, let's pick up AI first and then come back around to your books. What are your thoughts on AI? Have you used it for generating content? Do you encourage your writers to do so? Do you avoid it? Do you ignore it? Where do you stand with it?
It depends on which AI we're talking about. For voice recognition, I have no problem with it, because that's you using your words. For generating ideas, I stay well away from it, because that hasn't been sorted out in the courts yet. As we saw with the writer strikes in Hollywood, and well, actually the actor strikes too, there's a lot of problems with intellectual property and AI, because part of what the actors were on strike for was for they wanted clauses in their contract saying that the studio couldn't reproduce their voice and their image and basically make movies without them. And then the writers didn't want them, putting in something they'd written and said, write another movie in this style, and getting a second movie out of them without, the writer's involvement. So I think until we get some controls and it comes back to consent a lot, because there, I don't have to consent to AI looking at my blogs and using them. It can troll the whole internet, scrape the whole internet, and use that data. And I don't feel comfortable using somebody else's stuff that they haven't said that I can use. So I stay away from it.
Yeah, I think that's really, really deeply considered position to take. And as as it continues to evolve, the way that we work with it will continue to evolve. But I appreciate your ethics and integrity around that. Mass plagiarism is one of the big problems of AI, and for me myself as well. I feel like, because the majority of the text that is available to consume and to draw from in the public realm is, in my opinion, most likely fear-based, ego-centered, and divisive, that's what AI is going to keep spewing out, because that's what it's drawing from. So for me as well, that's another not only incentive but imperative for writers to write, because at the moment, as it is, yes, AI is potentially going to be drawing on the essence of what we've written. We have the opportunity to put our voices, our energy, and our frequency into the mix and into the public realm through sharing our writing. And my hope or sense is that if there's more heart-centered content going into the mix, then I don't think AI can ever reproduce heart-centered content. And that's why it's important for real people to write and to share our voices. And I think, going back to what you said at the beginning, to be less afraid of it not being perfect, because we're going to just end up with this, I mean, AI text is not perfect, but it has more potential to be grammatically perfect than our own human, messy, conversational interactions. But that's what we need more of. That's what we need to put more of our fallibility, more of our vulnerability, more of our real truth and our real voices into words, into text, into the public realm, because then that's what will help to feed people's hearts and souls. And ultimately, that's the more of that we create, the more we can create human connection. AI may still draw on it, but at least it will draw on something that is of a more heart-centered quality than it currently has to draw on.
Yeah, and our readers want to connect with us, not with, if they want to know what a bot has to say on something, they'll ask the bot. But also, if you're using your book to connect with your readers and then they meet you and you don't sound like your book, they may not be able to put it into words, but there is going to be a dissonance there that they won't be happy with, and then they're not going to trust you. But my other problem with, especially I need to come up with 100 ideas from AI no, you have lots of ideas. And I think people are there's a risk of us not trusting ourselves to be creative. And creativity is fundamental to the human experience. And I think we need to get back to trusting our own ideas and trusting that if we think of it and we're interested in it, somebody else is going to be interested. You don't need the computer's approval.
Yeah, that's so important, so valuable. Thank you for sharing that. And what I want to pick up on there as well is actually, you mentioned about the dissonance between if someone reads your book and it's not in your voice, there's a dissonance there. Now that's interesting for me as well, because that's not just AI. That takes us back to our conversation about education, because when I see writers writing, when the writing is most flat and least in the style and the voice and the energy and the animation of the person who's speaking to me, that writing is reminiscent of what they've learned at school. They're going for the technically accurate sentence structure, tends to be much more passive voice, tends to be much more formalized, and it loses the essence of the person themselves, because it aims for this standardized form, which is what we've tended to learn from school. Now, AI is much more going to be able to replicate that because it has a set of rules that can be replicated. So let's get off of AI now, but how do you encourage your writers to actually use their voice when they're writing, and to break free of those kind of cold and formalized structures that they might have learned at school for writing?
Part of it's by looking at texts that they enjoy reading and pointing out that, this isn't perfect grammar. And, they haven't used their commas exactly correctly, but you understand what they meant and you connected with it, and that's your purpose. Your purpose is not to sound like a grammar book. If people enjoyed reading grammar books, I wouldn't get so many weird looks whenever I'm reading one. So it's partly that. It's also pointing out in writers that maybe they don't connect with, but they admire, and showing how they have broken the rules, and that the rules are really not that important. They're also not that old. We've only had grammar since the 18th century. And it's always changing. So being too rule bound is just pointless. Shakespeare didn't need the rules, so why do we?
That's great. Thank you, Jennifer. So let's talk about your books. You said you were writing your third book. So how many books do you have out? How have you written them, and how have you published them? Because I think that's an interesting part as well.
My first and third are self-published. Put them the right way around. The first one is There's a Book in Every Expert, That's You. This one is for people wanting to write their expert books who are starting from just, I want to write a book. Ready to Publish is for people who are wanting to turn existing material, like if you've got an established blog, or you've run a course, or you've got a coaching program and you want to turn that into a book. So this one is more about shaping what you've already got. The first one I wrote, sent to my editor, and then sent to a publishing consultant who did all of the formatting and published it to Amazon and Ingram Spark. I always recommend doing both, because you don't want to give Amazon complete control over your book. The third one I formatted myself using Atticus, which is a publishing software. There are two main self-publishing softwares. They're only really good for books that don't have a lot of images. If you have a lot of images, you're going to have to use InDesign, and I am not a designer. I have no desire to learn how to use InDesign. There's Atticus, and then there's Vellum. Vellum is more expensive and not as accommodating. Atticus, whenever they do an update, if you've already bought it, you get the new update. With Vellum, you have to repurchase the software. Also, Atticus responds to questions. Whenever I was deciding which one to buy to publish the third book, I sent the same question to both companies. This was in 2022. Vellum have still not responded. So I don't know how responsive they are to their actual paying clients, but yeah. The second book is called Keeping Your Reader Front of Mind, and that's a weird little book I wrote for Bookboon, which is a publishing company that has a digital library for C-suite types. And they approached me to ask me to write it. They consider a book between 8,000 and 12,000 words. For me, that's more a chapter. So it is a little book. I mostly learned from that I don't like writing to corporate audiences, but their royalty structure means that book makes more money than my other two combined. So it wasn't a complete waste of time. I just didn't enjoy the process.
So who are the readers of your book? Who do you write for, and who do you work with?
For the books that I've published, then my readers are mostly business owners who want to write books to connect with and help their clients. I think for business books, especially, self-publishing is definitely the way to go. Whenever you publish traditionally, you have to publish the book that the publishing house wants to sell to their clients. They don't care what your clients want. And you're also on their timeline. Whenever you publish traditionally, you first have to find an agent. Most publishing houses won't read unsolicited manuscripts. That can take, on average, about 18 months. Then you find your agent. Your agent gives you some changes to make to your sample chapters and your outline. And then your agent takes another year to 18 months to find a publishing house. And then the publishing house tells you what book they want you to write. And that's the one you have to produce if they're going to publish it. Once upon a time, traditionally published authors did get nice big advances. You can still get small advances for nonfiction books, but we're talking £2,000 to £5,000, not the, you used to hear about authors getting like 50,000 so they could take a year off and go write. That doesn't happen so much anymore, especially not for an unknown author. And the publishing houses, unless you're Stephen King, are not going to do much publicizing of your book after. So you're still going to have to be promoting and marketing the book. So for a business owner, from that standpoint, self-publishing is definitely the way to go. If you have a book that you definitely want to have creative control over, whatever genre it is, self-publishing is going to give you more control.
So for a business owner, what advantages do they get from self-publishing? Why is that a good thing for them in comparison?
Well, you have the book that has the message you need it to have. Whenever, like how I use my books, if I am talking to somebody at networking and they have asked me a writing question, and I can say, well, I answer this in chapter 6 of this book. And then you can send them, and then they can get a complete answer, and then they can see how I could help. My book does lay out my whole process, but most people aren't going to go. People who say, I want to write a book, but I don't know where to start. The problem isn't that they don't know where to start. The problem is they don't have the accountability and the structure to write it. So, giving them my book, even whenever I give it away for free, isn't going to keep them from hiring me. And it's the same for any kind of, especially service-based or coaching business. Showing them your process is going to help them see how it will help them. The ones who read it. A lot of people just want to see that you've written a book, and then, okay, yeah, she does know what she's talking about, so I'll get on a call with her and see if she can help. The other way it helps business owners, or the other main way, is it gets you on bigger stages. So if you want to talk to other people's audiences, a lot of online summits won't consider keynotes that don't have author of in your byline, because they need to know that you have something that you've thought all the way through and that you can be interesting for 45 minutes.
That's fabulous. It's really I just really appreciate the depth of consideration of your answers and the way that you work with people to encourage them to do that. So what would it look like for someone to work with you? How long would they spend with you? How long would it take them to start with an idea and end up with a book? And then what are their next steps after that?
In my group program, you can finish it in 6 weeks. Or no, it's not 6 weeks, 6 months, sorry. What that looks like is I've got recorded workshops that take you through every step, and then if you choose to upgrade to the fortnightly coaching, then we have group coaching calls where I answer questions. And then I've also got a dedicated WhatsApp group so we can have asynchronous coaching. And that's really me there, explaining what the next step is. Writing a book isn't difficult, but nobody sits down to write a book. You're just taking the next step, you're writing the next word. And a lot of what I do as a coach is, no, you're not even just writing this chapter. What are you saying in this paragraph or this sentence? And it's reminding people that you're not to get overwhelmed by the whole big thing. And once writing the first draft, if you commit to the messy draft to get a book that's sort of how many pages is this? 163 pages. That I wrote the first draft of this in 1 month. I never wrote more than 2 hours a day, and I didn't write on weekends. You really can do it in about 40 hours if you commit to the messy draft. The active time for the rest of getting your book out is only another 25 hours. If you go through and you revise it in a systematic way, then you send it to your beta readers, they've got it for a month. You look at their feedback and you deal with that in a systematic way, send it to your editor, they've got it for a month. And that's part of what takes the 6 months, because you've got other people's schedules to deal with. And then at the end of the 6 months, you've got a book that's ready to go to be formatted. If you do the one-to-one, I've got a one-to-one where we sit together to get your first messy draft out, however you need to get it out, and then I do the rest. But that one is quite a bit more expensive than the first.
Great, lots of great options for people. What would someone do with their book then once they have it? How do they go about making the best of and making the most of this opportunity now they've got a book in their hands?
Well, part of what I do in all of my coaching is get them to start building their audience from the day they decide I'm definitely going to write a book. Because you can't just sort of quietly write a book and then suddenly spring it on the world and expect people to buy it, because they need to be expecting it and talking about it, and they need to want it. So we start building the audience at the beginning. Making the most of the book really means you committing to having it as a big part of your marketing. So you can buy my book here needs to be your CTA a lot of the time. I haven't been doing that lately because I've been focusing on other programs and my own marketing. But whenever I am pushing book sales, you will see me for 6 to 8 weeks. Every social media post that goes out, the CTA is, you can read more about this in this book. Here's the link. And it is getting used to just talking about nothing but the book all the time. You're not always saying, come buy my book. You're telling that you're giving them, a paragraph, this is where I talk about this problem and this is how it can help you, kinds of things. But it is still always coming back to, here's the book.
Thanks, Jennifer. This is an interesting question that's just come to mind. And I'm just going to kind of put it out there. Do you think books are still valuable? Is it still valuable to write and produce a book? I mean, we're talking about business books specifically. We could extend that question to any books generally. It's just such a kind of tricksy question for both of us who love books and our the viewers who love books. We work with writers, but I'm curious. I think it's a question that's still in the back of people's minds. Like, is a book valuable right now? What is the purpose of producing a book, putting that effort into producing a book?
I think we still hold authors in high regard. And author and authority have the same root word. We do still see authors as authorities on their topic. And you will know this from meeting people, and you talk about my book and they're, oh, you've written a book. Oh, I could never do that. And that's where we see that actually first, yes, they could write it, but that's where you see that we still do value authorship, and somebody taking the time to think through an entire, like every aspect of an idea and laying it out in a reader-friendly format. So I think we do still value that. I think, though, part of what stops people from writing is the other side of how we've always seen authors, where we seem to hold on to this myth that some of us are just born knowing how to write. We're not. I did not, pop out knowing how to write my letters even, let alone knowing how to write a book. And we mostly have the romantic poets, or not even just the romantic poets. It goes back to the ancient Greeks, because the poets then would, they would appeal to the muses and say, but then you have the ultimate get out of jail free card, because if I can't write today, it's because the gods said no. And, we have that going all the way through to today with inspiration is this thing that's beyond our control, and it's not. But the people who can somehow manage to harness this thing that we think we can't understand and produce a book, then we hold in high regard because they've managed to do that.
Thank you, Jennifer. So just as we come towards the end of our time together, I'm just going to open it up for you to ask if there's anything else that you want to share with people about your writing or the writing journey that you see people through. What is top of mind or close to your heart at the moment about writing and books and publishing?
That we all have a story that people need to hear, and they need to hear it in our words, not in somebody else's. And that we need to trust ourselves to share that. And if you can't trust yourself now, go get some crayons and some unlined paper, preferably not white. Because if you can't judge what you write on pink paper and purple crayon. Or like one client of mine, she didn't like crayons. She didn't like the way the paper felt on her skin. Purple sparkly pen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's such a beautiful, uplifting kind of image to leave. So yeah, go and get some crayons, everyone, and trust yourself, trust your voice, trust your story, trust your wisdom, because you have it. And yeah, everyone has that. We'll have, I think something that you mentioned about writers and writing, it does go back to romanticism. It goes back all the way through patriarchy, this idea of the isolated genius. It's interesting because that's comparable to why we still hold authors in high regard, but what is happening now more than ever is the democracy of being able to share our stories and to find connection with others through being able to share our stories and through normalizing that process. And it's not just for certain people who happen to have become celebrities. It's for all of us to share connection through story and through our own wisdom that we all hold.
And that's one of the nicest things about the developments in self-publishing is we don't have gatekeepers anymore. Because if you look back through history, go much further than the early 1800s, there aren't that many women writing because they just weren't allowed to. And so especially, as women, we need to get our voices out there. Women are still underserved by the traditional publishing industry, but we can just do it ourselves.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and talking to us today, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. And please tell our viewers where they can find you.
You can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram, but you can also find me at my website, ewc.coach.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.